Integrated Networks Chips AI, and the Brain Part 1, number 1571, the 12th of March 2026, Gerald C. EclaireMD Foundation, Category Science, Engineering, and Neuroscience. Introduction, a systems perspective from engineering to neuroscience. Over many years of work across engineering, artificial intelligence, and biomedical research, I gradually developed a systems view of science. From this perspective, chip design, artificial intelligence, and neuroscience are not isolated disciplines. Instead, they represent different layers of the same fundamental phenomenon, complex signal networks. Each field studies how information moves through interconnected structures, how signals are transmitted and transformed, and how networks maintain stability under constraints of energy, timing, and structure. When viewed together from a broader systems perspective, the similarities among these domains become remarkably clear. 3 layers of signal networks. At the most basic level, the structure of these systems can be summarized as follows: brain neurons greater than synapses, greater than neural circuits, cognition. Anodes greater than weighted connections, neural networks greater than pattern recognition. Chips, transistors, logic gates, circuits, processors. Although these systems belong to different scientific disciplines, they share several fundamental principles: structure, signal flow, timing, energy constraints, and work stability. In engineering terms, these are the core variables that determine whether any complex system can function reliably. The brain operates through biological cells and electrochemical signaling. Artificial intelligence operates through mathematical models and computational algorithms. Semiconductor chips operate through electrical circuits implemented in silicon. Yet in all 3 systems, information travels through networks, decisions depend on connectivity patterns, and system performance depends on stability and energy availability. In this sense, the brain, AI models, and semiconductor processors can all be viewed as different implementations of signal processing networks. My personal exposure to the 3 layers, my own professional path allowed me to experience these 3 layers directly. First, I spent 2 decades working in computer systems, including both hardware and software, as well as semiconductor chip design systems in Silicon Valley, through Avant Corporation. My work focused on physical design tools that determine how circuits are physically implemented on silicon chips. Physical design controls the placement, routing, timing, and power distribution within extremely complex integrated circuits. Second, after completing my undergraduate studies in both computer science and mechanical engineering, I went to MIT and studied artificial intelligence and pattern recognition under Professor Patrick Winston, and dynamic plasticity in mechanical design under Professor Norman Jones. This training introduced me to computational approaches to learning and pattern detection, along with practical knowledge related to mechanical and structural systems. Third, later in my life I turned toward biomedical research for 17 years. My work expanded into pathophysiological modeling, metabolic analysis, mortality diseases, and neurological systems. This transition became even more personal after my hemorrhagic stroke in June 2025, which led me to study brain physiology and recovery mechanisms in much greater depth and resulted in more than 230 research papers related to stroke. Because of these experiences, I have been able to observe the same core system principles from 3 different scientific directions. Many researchers work within only 1 layer. A neuroscientist studies biological neural networks, a computer scientist studies algorithms, a semiconductor engineer designs hardware architectures. However, when viewed from a broader systems perspective, these 3 layers are deeply interconnected. Convergence of modern science. Interestingly, modern scientific research is gradually moving toward this same integrated viewpoint. Several emerging fields attempt to connect electronics, computation, and brain science. Neuromorphic computing studies how to design computer hardware that mimics the structure and signaling behavior of biological neurons and synapses. Brain-inspired artificial intelligence develops algorithms that imitate learning mechanisms observed in biological neural networks, such as adaptive connection strengths and distributed information processing. Computational neuroscience uses mathematical models and computer simulations to understand how neural circuits in the brain process information, generate behavior, and adapt through plasticity. Together, these fields illustrate the growing convergence between semiconductor architecture, artificial intelligence, and biological neural systems. They reflect a growing recognition that the brain, artificial intelligence, and computing hardware are different expressions of the same underlying principles of networked information processing. This system's perspective became especially clear to me after my stroke in June 2025. When a stroke damages part of the brain, certain neural pathways suddenly stop functioning, much like a damaged circuit inside a complex electronic system. Yet the brain has an extraordinary ability to reorganize itself through neuroplasticity. Surviving neurons can gradually reroute signals, form new connections, and restore partial functionality. Observing this recovery process allowed me to see even more clearly how biological neural systems, artificial neural networks, and electronic circuits share similar principles of signal pathways, structural adaptation, and network stability. In my own case, this integrated view did not come from theoretical speculation alone. It emerged naturally through a career path that moved sequentially across these domains. Neuroplasticity observed through personal recovery. After my stroke, I began observing neuroplasticity and synaptogenesis in my own brain during the recovery process. Neuroplasticity refers to the brain's ability to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections. Synaptogenesis refers specifically to the formation of new synapses between neurons. In engineering terms, this resembles a network that reroutes signals where part of the original pathway is damaged. However, biological systems accomplish this in a fundamentally different way from electronic systems. Instead of simply switching existing circuits, the brain must physically rebuild portions of its network. In some sense, my own recovery became a living example of how adaptive networks operate. The brain attempts to restore lost functionality by reorganizing connections and creating new pathways for signal transmission. This observation strengthened my view that biological neural systems and engineered computational systems share deep structural similarities. Analysis: the metabolic cost of neuroplasticity, energy cost of neural reconstruction. Semiconductor systems, rerouting a signal is relatively simple. Logic gates switch states, and signals follow alternate electrical paths within existing circuitry. In the biological brain, rerouting signals after a stroke requires real structural reconstruction. This process is metabolically expensive for several reasons. First, synaptogenesis occurs. Creating new neural connections requires the synthesis of proteins and lipids that form synaptic membranes and signaling machinery. Second, axonal sprouting and dendritic remodeling occur. Neurons extend new axons and dendrites in an attempt to reconnect with neighboring cells. This requires cytoskeletal restructuring, membrane growth, and intracellular transport, all of which consume energy. Third, ion pumping is required. Neurons maintain electrical potentials through ion gradients across their membranes. Ion pumps such as the No.1571 must continuously operate to maintain these gradients. Newly active or reorganizing neurons therefore require significant ATP energy. Fourth, GLA support increases. Astrocytes provide metabolic support to neurons and deliver lactate and glucose to areas undergoing repair during active neural remodeling. These support systems increase their activity. Taken together, neural rerouting is not merely a signal redirection, it is large-scale biological reconstruction process that consumes significant metabolic resources. This is part 1.